Welcome back, everyone, for our daily deep dive into the news you've all been sharing.
Yeah, tons to get through today. Lots of stuff happening.
We're going to try to cut through all that noise, though, right? And bring you the most important insights across the markets, global affairs, and that always crazy world of tech.
That sounds like a plan. So where should we jump in first?
Well, I think the markets are always top of mind for a lot of people, so let's start there.
Okay, makes sense.
The Dow took a pretty big hit today, down 400 points, and the S&P 500 is really struggling to avoid what we call correction territory.
Yeah, correction territory, not a place you want to be.
No, not really. It generally means a drop of about 10% or more from the recent highs.
Ouch. So what's driving these drops?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because this comes after two positive sessions earlier this week on Monday and Tuesday. So it seems like there was a pretty quick shift in sentiment.
Yeah, that kind of whiplash can be concerning. What do you think caused it?
It's tough to say for sure, but it could be the market reacting to some new information or maybe some lingering worries that investors just can't shake.
Right? Anxieties about inflation and interest rates are still pretty high. And then there's that CNBC Fed survey that just came out showing a jump in the perceived chance of a recession.
Yeah, that's definitely not helping. It went from 23% in January to 36% now.
Wow, that's a pretty big jump.
It is. It really suggests that economic experts are seeing some potential problems on the horizon.
Yeah, and that likely plays into that drop in investor optimism we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. There was a Bank of America investor survey that showed the biggest drop in bullish sentiment towards stocks since March 2020.
March 2020.
Uh,
Wow, so we're talking about a crash in optimism here, basically.
exactly. And it's not surprising when you see so much volatility in the markets.
Speaking of navigating this volatility,
Mhm.
Goldman Sachs is recommending that investors should maybe focus on those cheap and stable stocks for now, companies with solid financials and predictable earnings.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense in this kind of environment, right? Stick to the companies that have proven themselves.
Exactly, and that kind of brings up a good question for anyone listening. How are the companies you're following positioned when it comes to stability and visibility? Because that's really what matters right now.
For sure, those are the key factors to consider. And all of this market turmoil, it's even prompting some discussions about what they're calling all-weather protection for 401k plans.
Yeah, I've heard of it's basically like strategies designed to perform well across different economic conditions, right? So no matter what happens, you're somewhat protected.
Exactly. It's all about trying to find some stability in a world that can feel very unstable right now. We've even heard about someone in their early 40s who's already lost $50,000 in their 401k because of all this market turmoil.
Oh, wow. That's really tough to hear.
Yeah.
And it just shows how real the impact of this volatility is for everyday people.
It absolutely does. Retirement planning suddenly feels a lot more complicated when you're facing those kinds of losses.
No kidding.
Hmm.
So do you think these all-weather strategies are really the answer here?
You know, it's hard to say there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to investing, but I do think it's smart to at least explore different options and make sure your portfolio is as diversified as possible.
Yeah, diversification is always key.
Absolutely. And shifting gears a little bit, still staying with market dynamics, there's also this question that's being raised about how to win the high momentum stock game these days.
Right, because historically, those high momentum stocks have been big winners. They've significantly outperformed the market, but that trend seems to be changing.
Yeah, it does seem like things are shifting. Why do you think that might be?
Well, it's possible that we're seeing a shift in market leadership. Maybe the factors that used to drive high growth stocks like low interest rates and a higher risk appetite aren't as influential anymore.
That makes sense. I guess the market is always evolving, right?
It is, and we might be seeing a rotation towards different sectors or different investment styles as a result.
Interesting. So maybe it's time to rethink some of those old playbooks.
Could be. Let's switch gears now and talk a bit about the tech sector. There's always something interesting happening over there.
Always. All right, so Google is making a huge move. They're acquiring cloud security startup Wiz for a whopping $32 billion in cash.
32 billion. Wow, that's their biggest acquisition ever, right?
It is, and it comes after another deal they were trying to make fell through last year, so this really signals how serious they are about cloud security.
Yeah, you don't drop that kind of money unless you're really committed. And it makes sense when you think about how competitive the cloud market is these days.
Right, security is essential if they want to attract and keep those big business clients.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
this acquisition is definitely a strategic move by Google to strengthen their position in that area.
Speaking of strategic moves, Intel's stock has been on an upward trend for the past 5 days, but it's still below those February highs when there were all those rumors about a potential company breakup.
Ah, yeah. So it seems like there's still some uncertainty there, even with the recent positive movement.
Right, it goes to show how complex stock valuation can be. All these different factors come into play.
Absolutely. Short-term trends can sometimes get overshadowed by those bigger strategic questions that investors are thinking about.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of tech giants, Apple just lost an antitrust appeal in a German court.
Oh, really? What was that about?
It was related to their App Store policies.
Mm.
I don't have all the details yet, but it's another example of the increasing scrutiny that big tech is facing globally.
Yeah, these legal challenges seem to be popping up everywhere as regulators start to really examine the market power and practices of these huge companies.
It's definitely something to watch because this loss in Germany could have ripple effects in other legal battles that are going on.
Absolutely. It sets a precedent that other regulators might follow.
Now let's switch lanes again and talk about the world of electric vehicles, which is really heating up.
Okay, what's going on there?
Well, Tesla's big rival in China, Zeekr, is making a pretty bold move. They're going to offer advanced driver assistance systems for free to their customers in China.
Wow, free 80s. That's a big deal.
It's a clear attempt to grab some market share in what's becoming an incredibly competitive EV market.
Right, because China is really the epicenter of EV development and sales right now.
It is. So the question is, do you think this free 80s offer will be enough to really challenge Tesla's brand loyalty there?
That's a tough one. I mean, free features are always a strong incentive, but Tesla has built up a lot of brand loyalty over the years.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
It definitely will. And speaking of EV advancements, BYD shares actually rallied today after they announced this new technology that they claim can charge EVs in just 5 minutes.
5 minutes, that's crazy fast.
It is. If that turns out to be true and they can actually roll it out widely, it could be a total game changer for EV adoption.
Right, because charging time is one of the biggest concerns that people have about electric vehicles.
Exactly. If they can eliminate that concern, it could make a huge difference.
So a lot of exciting developments in the EV space for sure.
Definitely. Now, before we move on from tech entirely, did you see that Google is also rolling out some new healthcare AI updates for their search platform?
Oh, yeah, I saw that they haven't shared a lot of specifics yet, though.
Right. They're being a little mysterious about it, but it's clearly part of their ongoing effort to integrate AI into how we access and use health-related information.
It makes sense when you think about how much health information people already get through Google searches.
Exactly. And given Google's massive reach, these updates could potentially impact a huge number of people.
No doubt. On a less positive note, the FTC is alleging that there's been a big Amazon AI scam going on where investors were defrauded out of millions of dollars.
Oh, wow. What happened there?
Basically, they were lured in with promises of passive income and claims that they could get better returns than the stock market.
This is too good to be true.
They were even using TikTok videos to spread the word with all these fake displays of wealth and even using Warren Buffett's image.
Ugh. It's amazing how sophisticated these scams are getting.
It's a reminder to always be really careful about investment promises you see online, especially if they seem too good to be true.
Absolutely. Do your research and be skeptical.
On a slightly more optimistic note, Tom Lee from Fundstrat is saying that NVIDIA's recent stock rebound could actually be a good sign for potential trade negotiations.
Really? How so?
It's an indirect link, but his thinking is that when a key tech company like NVIDIA is performing well, it might create a more favorable environment for those kinds of talks.
Interesting. So it's like a sign of economic confidence that could boost those negotiations.
That's the idea. I guess it remains to be seen if he's right, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
It is for sure. So anything else happening in tech before we move on?
Well, there was a flurry of analyst calls yesterday on some of the major players like NVIDIA, Tesla, Apple, Coinbase, Nike, and Amazon.
Oh, yeah. Those calls can be pretty insightful. They give you a glimpse into what Wall Street is thinking about those companies.
Exactly. They can really influence investor sentiment, so it's always worth paying attention to.
Makes sense. So should we shift gears now and talk about some global affairs?
Yeah, let's do that. There's certainly been a lot happening on that front as well.
For sure. What should we start with?
Well, the Supreme Court Chief Justice actually made a pretty rare public statement the other day rebuking Trump for calling to impeach a judge who was involved in a deportation case concerning alleged Trinidad gang members.
Wow, so the Chief Justice is publicly criticizing a former president. That's not something you see every day.
It's definitely unusual, and it highlights the importance of judicial independence as well as the potential consequences when political figures start directly criticizing specific judges and their decisions.
Yeah, that's a crucial point because it can undermine public trust in the judicial system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the news that Trump had a call with Putin that lasted at least 90 minutes.
Really? What were they talking about?
Well, reportedly, they were discussing a possible ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia.
Wow, that's significant, especially since Trump has previously suggested that the U.S. might be willing to compromise on some conditions for a pause in the war.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity to an already incredibly complicated situation.
It does, and any direct communication between those two leaders regarding a potential ceasefire has major implications for the trajectory of the war and for international relations in general.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, in Europe, the German parliament just passed a historic debt reform.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. It's all about enabling them to spend more on defense, right?
Exactly. It involves changes to their debt break rule and the creation of a new infrastructure fund.
So it's a pretty major shift in Germany's fiscal policy.
It is, and it's a direct response to the current geopolitical landscape with the war in Ukraine and everything else that's going on.
Makes sense. They're basically realigning their national priorities to focus more on defense and infrastructure.
Exactly. And unfortunately, the situation in Gaza has taken a very dark turn. Israeli airstrikes have reportedly killed over 400 people, according to Palestinian health authorities.
Oh, wow, that's terrible.
It is, and it's raising serious concerns that the 2-month ceasefire that was in place has collapsed.
It's a devastating escalation of violence, and it will undoubtedly lead to more international pressure to de-escalate the situation.
Something needs to be done to prevent further loss of life.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And as if things weren't tense enough in the region already, Israel's military also reported intercepting a missile that was fired from Yemen.
Oh, wow. So now there's another player involved.
Right. It just goes to show how interconnected all these conflicts are in the Middle East and how quickly things can escalate.
It's a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in that region.
It is, and it underscores the need for continued diplomatic efforts to address the root causes of these conflicts.
Absolutely. And finally, in global affairs, there's a big battle brewing in the UK over iPhone privacy.
Oh, yeah, I saw something about that. What's going on?
So basically, Apple is refusing a request from the UK government to create a backdoor into encrypted data.
That's a tough one. I can see both sides of the argument there. Right. It's about finding that balance between national security and user privacy.
Exactly. The UK government is arguing that they need access to this data for law enforcement purposes. But Apple is concerned that creating a backdoor would compromise the security of all iPhone users.
And this case is being watched very closely because it could set a precedent for how governments around the world try to access encrypted data in the future.
Absolutely. It has major implications for digital privacy and security globally.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from market volatility and tech giants making big moves to escalating geopolitical tensions and crucial debates about privacy and security.
It's a lot to take in, but it's important to stay informed about these issues that are shaping our world.
I agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the news, I encourage you to think about how these events might impact your own life and your own understanding of what's happening around us.
Yeah. What stood out to you most, and what questions do you still have? Because these are conversations that we need to keep having.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for another deep dive into the news.
See you then.